This episode of Tech Indie Learning is brought to you by the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc.
Heritage pulses through our veins. It reverberates through the many facets of our national identity, even when we're unconscious of its influence. Today, we talk all things Tuk Band. So come, let me Tech Indie Learning.
Hello, I'm Carl Watson, retired senior lecturer in history and archaeology at the University of the West Indies.
I'm Zoena Perry-Willett. I'm a lover of Barbadian heritage and an eternal student here at Tech Indie Learning. I'm here with Carl, who has given me permission to call him Carl. And today we are talking about the sweetest song you can hear in the Caribbean, not just in Barbados, the Tuk Band. Carl, can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the Tuk Band?
I most certainly can, and I will. I would argue that of all the topics we have discussed over the series, the one most deeply rooted in West Africa is the Tuk Band. But yet, following some of the points that we've raised in previous segments, the Tuk Band itself also has elements of cultures from other geographic regions, particularly the British Isles, and so allows me to underscore a point I'd made previously that all cultures tend not to be isolated, but tend to borrow and have some aspect of shared or derivative aspects to them. But the Tuk Band, and associated with Tuk Band, the dancers, because the dances are, after all, an integral part. Shaggy Bear, Mother Sally, the stilt dances, all integral parts of the Tuk Band. Now, when did the Tuk Band appear in Barbados? And I have seen photographs going back to the 1870s of Tuk Band with the dancers, and it's clear that there has been some change over time, but also on that point, if one goes back beyond 1870 and looks for a time period that the Tuk Band would have been introduced into Barbados, I would argue that it's quite likely that towards the end of the 17th century, something close to or approximating the Tuk Band made its appearance in Barbados. Now, in West Africa, you had age groups, you had societies, and dance was a very important aspect of West African culture in a wide range of ethnicities, because we can speak glibly about West Africa as being a large geographic location, but West Africa is actually so diverse and has so many peoples living in it, speaking different languages, having different cultures. Africa itself is a huge continent, the biggest continent on earth, and a diverse place. So we have to be wary of making generalizations, but the essential point is that the Barbadian population, the core of the Barbadian population, is a very old population. Most Barbadians can trace their origins back to the 17th century. Now, another point to clarify is there is a widespread belief that during the period of slavery, every attempt was made to remove any aspect or any retention of African culture, that essentially enslaved people of African origin were deliberately deprogrammed of aspects of their African culture. But this is not true. If you read documents of the period, I remember once coming across a letter from a plantation manager to an absentee owner. And the absentee owner was asking about how do things operate on the plantation? What is life like? What is life like for the enslaved people? And all these questions were asked. And one of the answers was, on weekends, the enslaved are given time to either plant in small grounds attached to their houses, or time to carry out, and they use the word in the document that I've seen elsewhere, time to conduct their plays. Now, we don't want to think of play in a Western sense like something presented on a stage with a script that you've memorized and you're going to interact with your fellow actors and so on. A play in that late 17th, 18th century context is really and truly a celebration and a participation by individuals within a given area that involve dance, music, and specific dances that again had meaning. Let me look at one aspect of the Tuk Band. I mentioned too, the drum, which is, the drum is a European kettle drum. It's not a Congo drum, it's a European kettle drum, but the beat is not a European beat. The beat is a West African beat. So there you have the blending of two cultures. But let me move on then to the dance, shaggy bear. If you watch shaggy bear locally, you can go to, if you don't have the chance to go to West Africa and see it with your own eyes, you can watch a documentary and watch the various ethnicities, the Fon people, the Ga, the Senegalese, the people of the Senegambia region. And you will see that shaggy bear is a cultural manifestation that survived the rigors and the horrors of the Middle Passage. I have often made this point to my students that when people were entrapped in West Africa and then transported by force across the Atlantic to be sold as enslaved people, if they had cultural, tangible possessions on them, like they may have had a copper manila, because remember, they were coming from societies that didn't have paper money, but of course they bought and sold like any other peoples around the earth. And paper money is simply our recognition that we ascribe a value to it. It's just a piece of paper that's worth nothing, but it's only worth something because we, among ourselves, agree that it is worth something, and we can exchange it for goods. In other societies that didn't have paper money, you would have had other items of exchange. As I said, copper manilas is one. Glass beads is another. And other items, tangible items. So these could be taken away from you. But you couldn't strip somebody. You could strip their clothes from them. You could take off a gold chain if they had a gold chain on them. But you couldn't take what's in the brain. You couldn't take their culture from them. You could not, although the word loose is used, deprogram, you could not deprogram them. So aspects of West African culture survived the Middle Passage and were brought to our islands. And it is a mistake to think that people were forced to abandon any aspect of African culture.
Right.
The argument used by this plantation manager was that he preferred to have the enslaved on the plantation have plays of their own, dances of their own. He said that is some sort of enjoyment away from the rigors and the hardships of slavery. And he argued, I've seen people the whole night, participate in festivities and so on, and come to work in the fields the following morning. But he said, this is how he's explaining it to the plantation owner, they work, the people under my control work better if I allow them that scope to express their cultural interests and so on. What happened in our history is that with emancipation, a new society, free society was created. And particularly the Anglican Church, which during the period of slavery had not actively worked to bring the enslaved into the church and turn them into practicing, believing Christians, but with emancipation and the creation of a new society, it was felt absolutely necessary that people who were quote unquote pagan or had their own belief systems, they needed to forget those belief systems and become Christian in order to function in this newly created society. So it was at that point in the 19th century that aspects and remnants of African culture, including things like their names, for example, Kwako, Kwao, Kumana, Kwa, Kajo, all the Akandi names that tradition were given, all these things change, and then the names like James and Peter, John, and the biblical names came into vogue. So, and remember, the prescriptions against what was called banjo music, that you couldn't play, a lot of people told their children, you couldn't play banjo music because that was disrespecting the household. It wasn't a Christian thing. But despite all of this, Tuk Band and the dances of Tuk Band survived. And they survived because they were an expression of the community, they were an expression of the people.
There's nothing sweeter than the pulsating song with the drum, the twinkle of the triangle, or the shrill whistle of the penny whistle when you're talking about the Tuk Band. So I'm here with someone who knows so much about it, Mr. Jeffrey Ify Wilkinson. Ify, I have heard you are the person to talk to about all things Tuk Band. What makes a Tuk Band a Tuk Band?
Barbados point of view.
Yeah.
2 kettles, 1 bass, penny whistle, triangle. And I say penny whistle because it is the Clark C penny whistle. There are many others, but the Clark C penny whistle is not considered a musical instrument, but a cultural tool. Because things like the recorder has specific notes and fingerings, the recorder doesn't do that. The Clark C doesn't do that. But the fingering for the Clark C, persons who know of a recorder or have music information with them, to me, easier grasp stuff of the Clark C. Those that play the Clark C and only know the Clark C can't play the recorder because they're 2 different types of instruments to be. The kettles, as opposed to recent times, you'll find that a Tuk Band comprises of a bass, a kettle, and a flute. And in even more recent times, you have saxophones, trumpet, steel pan. These are all the developments. But the traditional instrument is 1 kettle called a first kettle, 2nd kettle, a second kettle or a vamp. The bass drum was always known earlier as the bum drum. So you have first kettle, 2nd kettle vamp, penny whistle Clark C. Triangle used to be mild steel. I'm now using stainless steel because of the sound, higher pitch, and no rust and so on. Everybody is a little uncomfortable with. So we're modernizing as we go on, but modernization of traditional stuff. You don't lose the basic principles, but you keep modernizing as you go on.
How are you exporting? Because I know you're making the instruments. How are you exporting our version of the Tuk Band to the rest of the world?
Honestly, I am not too keen on the whole rest of the world stuff.
Oh.
But I can tell you this. Across the communities of Barbados, There is much enthusiasm. There is much, as a matter of fact, the National Cultural Foundation / Pioneers Creative Workshop just did a whole series of classes. And whilst in teaching, one of the things that came up is boom, take, take, boom, take, take.
Can't stop moving when you heard that.
Boom, take, take, boom, take, take is pretty much one of the things that most Bajans would say. And it, to me, is the youth of today using that. In my time, it was why, my money gone?
I've never heard that.
Why, my money gone? That was when you've gone to an excursion and you're beating the side of the bus.
Okay.
So the same boom, take, take, boom, take, take is what they used to be saying. Why, my money gone? Why, my money gone? Nowadays, there's no picnic. There is boom, take, take, boom, take, take, boom, take, take, boom, take, take.
It's sports day.
Mhm.
In the drums, in the stands,
Right.
as we hear.
So in recent times, as opposed to just a drum or your biscuit tin or your lunch tin
Yeah.
or whatever, or the chairs, they're now playing bass and kettles in the during the presentations or during the in the sports and so on.
You usually see the Tuk Band accompanied by several characters. Can you elaborate a little bit about those characters?
Well, first of all, let me explain that the Tuk Band, as we are seeing it now, was never a unit. The Tuk Band is the engine of the landship. The Barbados landship is the only ship that never goes to sea.
Yeah.
And a ship cannot function to move from point A to point B unless it have an engine. The engine of the landship is the Tuk Band. In more recent years, as the landship would have gone years ago and did their community activities, whether it be a social party or whatever, and as time went on, the Tuk Band was taken out or took themselves out to go and play at bank holidays and rum shops and all kind of stuff. Now, let's make it clear. Amongst that, you would have found, which we don't hear much of now, the shaggy bear.
Yeah.
The shaggy bear was not of yesteryear. The bank holiday bear was of yesteryear.
And the White Holiday Bear looks similar to the
Similar to the shaggy bear, only slight much differences. So outside of the bank holiday bear, we now have the shaggy bear, which is still characteristics. We have the donkey man. You also have donkey belly.
Donkey Belly.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
No, you would never heard it either.
No.
But this is tradition. Oh, this came from with the Tuk Band.
Yeah.
Out of the landship. You also had the stilt walker, which is what we call here. But along with the stilt walker, you had shaggy bear, mother Sally, donkey man, donkey belly, bank holiday bear. These are all characteristics of the Barbados landship, along with the maypole from the landship. There's so many other stuff that used to happen in there. And all these were things that were brought with the Africans when they came, but had to readjust and rearrange to accommodate what was accepted. Because like other drums, African drums was not accepted. And the only way to allow for them to get certain things done was to mimic those instruments that were used by the British, Scottish and Fife bands, which is the bass, the kettles. Obviously, the bagpipes and so on was used earlier, but the penny whistle came from replace it and so on. All these came what was being accepted. So what they did was to make drums that mimicked the English military drums out of artificial skins and out of animal skins, sorry. And those became accepted. And within doing so, then they introduced other rhythms and so on, traditional rhythms. So within Tuk Band music, you probably have had in your recording, you will hear the waltz, which is considered part military because the waltz is also the slow march. The Fassi, which is fast march, and the Tuk Band, which is calypso music. But calypso music, the way how Tuk Band is played with the second kettle, is the introduction of those African rhythms that became accepted only because we were allowed to play the instruments that we made. So boom take take is now being accepted too. Why my money gone and quite a few others. It's all being accepted.
So interesting. So
It is.
if you were to look 30 years into the future, what does Tuk Band look like to you?
With modernized things happening, and I've seen it and I've heard it already, we still don't get the hardcore, but we have keyboard drums and all the rest that goes with it, and keyboard whistles and flutes. So there'll be the watered down version. I am saying that if we maintain as being done now, and you would have seen in this stuff, there's a 9-year-old young lady there playing a kettle drum. She did it for Whole Town Festival, and you would find that if these traditions keep up, as the whole units, as the whole generations keeps going, once the foundation is there, then everything keeps going. And the development, for instance, Bridgetown has buildings that are part of the World Heritage Organization system. The windows are of today, but the physical structure can't be changed. You can change the design of the windows, you can change the color of the paint, but you can't make the windows more or less. Same thing goes for Tuk Band. You don't want to change the basic structural study, but you can colorize and carry on and do as you see fit.
Okay, I think so. This was a wonderful discussion about the Tuk Band. I learned a lot. I know our viewers would have learned a lot, but I just wonder if you could play me out a little beat, something that you remember.
Boom, tick, tick, boom, tick, tick, boom, tick, tick, boom,
Oh,
tick.
I behaved myself. It's all right.
When I was a child, the Tuk Bands of my childhood had a vastly different meaning to the Tuk Bands of today. The Tuk Bands of today have a degree of artificiality about them. The Tuk Bands of today have been removed from the people. They no longer come into communities and perform or play for their people. What the Tuk Band has become today is an artificial projection for the tourist gaze. So it's become a caricature of what it once was. Look at the Mother Sally. When I was a child, all Mother Sallys were played by men. Today, I don't see any men at all playing Mother Sallys. I don't know if it is related to homophobia in society or the feeling of young Barbadian males that they're not going to put on, dress like a woman and go and dance in public. Whatever reason, nowadays you see women playing the role of Mother Sally. Now, that again is entirely contrary to the West African traditions that had survived the Middle Passage and had remained in Barbadian culture and in Barbadian society for several hundred years. So that it's like a Walt Disney's type thing. You, as I said, a caricature. You see no more than Mother Sally's now. They use the Barbadian term, the botsy. It's much too big. I won't use the other B word, but they, well, you know what, are very, very large.
Could say chess.
But you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That it, you know, I'll tell you this, and you probably laugh again at it. When the Tuk Band came down Culloden Road, they would come on like bank holidays and so on. And one of the times that it particularly came was a race day. When I was a child, races were big, big, big. You know, we didn't have a lot of attractions. We didn't have a lot of entertainment facilities. Things were limited. So the garrison pasture, Savannah, was filled with thousands and thousands of people on a race day. I mean, in the 1940s and 50s, you probably had more people from all over Barbados coming down to town to go to the races than you would see even on a Gold Cup day. And the Tuk Band would go, and they would play, they would perform. Who were they performing for? Their fellow Barbadians. When they came, it was a joyous occasion. My father would always have some rum, and then he would always leave a shilling or two, because, well, that was the days of shillings and tuppence and all those half florin, all of that, all the old coinage that we don't use today. And my mother was perhaps unusual for the time, but she didn't object if I went out into the street and danced with the Mother Sally, which I did. And I enjoyed. And you laugh, and I'll tell you this. Not many years ago, we took a group to perform in Charleston, South Carolina. And we did it with a limited budget. So we took a Tuk Band with us, and we took still dancers, but we didn't have money to pay for Shaggy Bear or a Mother Sally. And what did Carl Watson do? He persuaded a friend of his, Rhoda Green, in Charleston, to lend him a skirt and a blouse
Oh man,
to
I
go
would
with
pay
him
money.
to buy a wig and a mask. And I got a pillow from her house and strapped it on. And I went out there and I danced in Mother Sally.
Do you think 30 years from now the Tuk Band will have been altered so much as a tourism product, or do you see it maybe not going all the way back to its roots, but getting a stronger foothold into the roots that it had?
30 years from now, well, I don't know. Looking forward to the future, it'll be a future dominated by artificial intelligence. And 30 years, I mean, the technique already exists, but 30 years from now, people might be watching a hologram, and you could create beings that would not real, not substantial. You could put your hand through them, but they look real and act real and be real. And you know, to tell you the honest truth, I cannot begin to conceptualize the world from today 15 years in the future, for us 30 years in the future. We're living now on the cusp of a monumental change. This, we're living through the start of an enormous revolutionary period. We'll retain aspects of the past, but a brave new world out there awaits, and what it's going to end up like is anybody's guess.
But I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick with this imagination of you in a Mother Sally suit.
Oh.
And see if I can put that to you dancing to the Tuk Band in my head and see if I can make that become a reality. Heritage is the pulsating rhythm of our past and the engine of our future. So join us next time as we tech in the learning.